we now have kind of closed the full loop of caching inside of our exec function. So we're handling the case in which we do not have information stored, and we also are handling the case in which we do. However, it looks like any time we attempt to actually return some stored data from Redis from this function, our app doesn't quite work the way we expect. In particular, the app seems to think that we are logged in, but we don't actually have any blog posts. So clearly something is not working the way we expect. Well, this really goes back to the same topic that we just discussed a moment ago, and it comes down to the return type, or the values that we are returning from the exec function. At present, if we have something stored inside of cache, we are parsing that from JSON into a plain JavaScript object and then returning the result. However, the exec function expects us to return Mongoose documents, or what we refer to also as model instances. So to put it in kind of diagram format, we're in this situation. So right now, we are returning plain JSON data that has absolutely no functions or anything tied to it. It's just the raw data. But the exec function expects us to return a Mongoose model, which has properties like the get function, set, validate, is modified, all the stored properties that belong to that model. So our application only appears to be like half working because it's not getting the type of data that it expects back from that exec function. So we need to somehow take this JSON representation, the model that we have right now, and turn it into the actual document that we are expected to return. So that might actually sound kind of challenging, but in fact, it's just one of those things that, you got to dig into the documentation to figure out how to do. To show you what we're going to do, back inside of our cache value if statement right here, I'm going to change the console log to be simply this. Now you'll recall that this inside this function is a reference to the query that we are currently executing. So we are going to console log out this, and this is going to be the current query that is being executed. So I'm going to save this file and then run the query again by refreshing the page inside my browser. Okay, so I just refreshed the page. Now I'll go back over to my terminal and you'll see a tremendous number of properties all tied to the current query that was just executed. Now I'm going to scroll through here a little bit, and maybe about 100 lines up or so, I'm going to eventually come across a property called model. Model right here is a reference to the model class that is tied to the query that we are executing. So this model property right here is essentially the base class for a user or a blog post inside of our application. So to take the JSON data that we just pulled out of Redis right here and actually turn it into a document or a model instance that can be used correctly throughout our application, we can call this, new this.model, and then pass in the result of that parse statement. Like so. So this.model, again, is a reference to the model that represents this query, or that this query is attached to. We can create a new instance of that model by calling new the model class itself, and then pass in the properties that we want to assign to that model. This is no different than typical, just like normal Mongoose code that we would write, where we might say something like new blog, and then pass in a title of hi and content of there. We're doing the same exact thing here. The only difference is that some of the constituent parts look a little bit different. So this.model would be the same as just referencing blog, and json.parse with our cache values would be the same thing as passing in a normal JavaScript object with some set of values. Okay, so that's going to take all the data that we've stored and try to turn it into an actual document. So I'm going to take the result of this right here, and I'm going to assign it to a variable that I'm just going to call doc. And then we will return that rather than returning what we had before. So I'm going to save this file, and let's try testing this out inside the browser. So I'll refresh the page. And well, it looks like we are still logged in, and it looks like the content on the screen is a little bit different, but we definitely still have an error message down here. So it looks like something is still not behaving quite the way we expect. Well, let's try thinking about this for a little bit. So right now, we're taking the result of cache value and passing it into the this.model constructor. Now this is a little bit of a gotcha, so I'm just going to tell you what's going on here. At present, we have two types of values, kind of roughly speaking, that we are storing inside of Redis. We are storing model instances, like our current user that we are fetching, but we are also storing arrays of models or arrays of records, which is the case for our list of blog posts. Whenever we create a new instance of a model, as we are doing right here, the expectation is that we're going to pass in exactly one attribute or one record's worth of attributes as arguments. So whenever we try to take the current user and turn them into a model instance, this line of code right here is working perfectly because this JSON.parse turns into something that has, like, my ID with my Google ID and whatever else belongs to a single user. However, when we pull out an array of blog posts, the JSON.parse right here turns into an array of blog posts, each of which need to individually be turned into a model instance. So we made a little bit of progress, but now we need to handle both cases properly. The case in which we are dealing with an array and the case in which we are dealing with a single object. So let's pause right here. We're going to come back to the next video and we're going to update this line of code to handle both the case in which we just fetched a single object or an array of objects. So I'll see you in just a minute.